Okay, let me know when you're going to mute me. Yes? Hello. Hello, everyone. And thank you so much for joining in. Dr. Judy of Dr. Judy WTF, What the Freud. And tonight we're going to be talking about shame shifting. But first, a little bit about me, who I am, the Psychological Healing Center, and of course, the Be the Cause Mind Map, which is a pathway to healing that I created and is my model for psychotherapy. And so, just a little bit about me. I'm a clinical psychologist. I've been a clinical psychologist for many, many years and have been in the helping profession for decades. And so all this work has taken me from psychoanalytic type work to collapsing it into 10 sessions of focused therapy predicated on isolating childhood wounds, how we react to them, how we encode them, and how they break us down. So, tonight we're going to be talking about shame shifting. And for those of you who do not know about my Instagram posts, I posted something about that today. And if you can get it up there, I shall read it to you. Shame shifting is a psychological projection tactic designed to spare the person of responsibility and smear the other person with toxic shame. And this is a call-in show, everyone, so I hope to hear from you. And the number is posted, so please feel free to call in. And for those of you who've been trying to call in, we have had trouble with the call center. I'm hoping that it's resolved. I've been told that it's resolved. And so please feel free to call in. And if it doesn't work, what you could do is type me a question and I can answer that question. And that way we can communicate and I can analyze everything via the mind map. So I want to start with shame. What is shame? There's normal shame. If you steal something and somebody catches you and you have a conscience, then you'll probably be ashamed of yourself for getting off the track and into something illegal and unethical. If, for example, you miss a meeting at work and you overslept and then you come in 30 minutes late, it's natural to feel embarrassed and ashamed of yourself because, again, you're feeling like there's some sort of sense of responsibility you have to other people, and you're not fulfilling it, or you slipped up and didn't fulfill it. And so those are normal feelings of shame. I want to get into what is toxic shame. So I pulled up an article here by Darlene Lancer, JDMFT, written back in 2016, called What is Toxic Shame? And she talks about how it can ruin your life. Everyone's experienced shame at one time or another. It's an emotional and physical symptom like any other, but when it's severe, it can be extremely painful and, might I add, very embarrassing. In her article, she talks about how shame stimulates the sympathetic nervous system, causing a fight, flight, freeze reaction. This is really described in panel 2 as the amygdala that then reacts to some kind of wound. So in panel 2, you can see that there's a crack in the system. Sorry, my voice is going here. That's what I get for talking all day. We feel exposed and want to hide or react with rage while feeling profoundly alienated from others and good parts of ourselves. We may not be able to think or talk clearly, and we're consumed with self loathing. So, where does this self loathing come from? And why are we projecting our toxic shame onto others? And, like I said in my Instagram quote, who wants to carry toxic shame? So, just like projecting anger, just like projecting other uncomfortable feelings, we want to rid ourselves of these feelings. And so we want to project them onto another and smear them with this toxicity. And if our smear tactic works, then guess what happens? They soak in the toxic shame. And I'm going to analyze all this in terms of why we carry it and why the other person soaks it all in, and what you can do to get rid of your toxic shame, and what the other person can do to create boundaries so that they don't soak in this toxic shame. So I want to go a little bit more into this self-loathing thing that that culminates in all kinds of horrible negative core beliefs like worthlessness, core beliefs like feeling like a loser, core beliefs like feeling stupid, and on and on and on. um, this internalized shame, which comes from the family blueprint, which we will mind map in a minute, um, hangs around and alters our self image. So instead of really seeing clearly who we are and what we are, we're living in kind of like a cracked lens of distorted mirrors where we're constantly seeing ourselves through the lens of critical eyes. And this toxicity then reflects back onto us, and it boomerangs and drives us crazy. And then we feel trapped in what I refer to as this double dungeon of darkness, just another form of double dungeon of darkness. And a lot of this is going on in the mind, so nobody even has to say anything. You can be triggering yourself all day long in this toxic shame. Unlike ordinary shame, she writes, internalized shame hangs around for a long time. And it's a term first coined by Sylvan Tompkins in the early 1960s. I learn something new every day in his scholarly examination of human affect. And he talks about that beneath the conscious is an unconscious. And that's where we're going to go today. And again, this is a call-in show, and I want to hear how you've been either projecting your toxic shame on others, whether other people are identifying with that toxic shame and taking on the projection and feeling it themselves and acting out on it, and whether this what the Freud loop through is doing in your life and how it got there. So let's talk about the mind map and breaking all of this down, and talk about it in terms of how this toxic shame begins, and then how and why we shift it to other people. So let's take a look at that mind map. And breaking it down for you, you could see that the first three rows represent the past encoding. We've got wounds of childhood, which is the inception of the pain and the shadows that block our psychological growth. And then we've got the reactions to the wound, which is where we feel the activation of the amygdala, and the flight, freeze, and fawn system gets all lit up. And then panel 3 is where all these negative core beliefs get dumped, core beliefs about yourself and the world. And then they reverberate in your head. And when they're shame-based, they will reverberate shame-based messages, which will drive you down into chaos, defenses, and breakdowns. And for those of you who are familiar with the mind map and have done my system, or for those of you who have purchased the mind map video series, which I highly recommend that you do, because it's a really smooth way to learn the system. And it's me lecturing all the 9 panels and really breaking it down. Obviously, it comes with the mind map journal so that you could journal your journey, and the Be the Cause book. And it's a package. And by the way, if you haven't gotten a free download of the Be the Cause Healing Human Disconnect PDF, please, please, please grab it. It's step one in really understanding that you are not the cause of part one of your life. However, you could turn that around and be the cause of part two of your life. And why aren't you the cause of part one of your life? Because we've been blueprinted. We've been blueprinted by our fathers, our mothers, primary caregivers, grandmothers, grandfathers, multiple generations of people, our culture, and so on. So if you look at it that way, we have been formed, we have been programmed, we've been taught certain belief systems, and obviously belief systems about ourselves as well. And so the purpose of the mind map is to clear away these faulty and destructive and shameful belief systems so that you can start to grow again, and so that you can start to see straight through a psychological lens that I call the clear lens of perception, and then shift out of the mess and be the cause of part two of your life. So let's talk about panel one wounds in the context of toxic shame. And these wounds include physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional, verbal abuse, neglect, and smothering. And there are countless ways to shame a child. And it doesn't have to be verbal. And the first 3 panels actually represent not only verbal stage of life, but the pre-verbal stage of life, meaning the time of life where you didn't talk, where you didn't have language, from birth to age whatever, several months, a year, and then the cognition gets stronger, and then we take all of these messagings, and then we foundationally lay it down into an encoding that's not usually very, very, very affirming in the case of toxic shame. So how does this toxic shame develop? So let's take each wound and see where that toxic shame lives. So if we're talking about, let's say, physical abuse, I deal with a lot of people from a lot of cultures, and there are several patients who suffer and have been shamed by their parents by being slapped and humiliated and beaten by a belt, beaten by a cane. And I can't tell you what I've seen in the office, because there are just so many cases. And what not only does it hurt physically, it is embarrassing. It is embarrassing to go to school with bruises on your body and hide them. It is embarrassing not to be able to bring your friends over because you don't trust that your parents are going to be able to hold a normal conversation. It's embarrassing to have a home where dad is drinking or mom is drinking or doing drugs. It's embarrassing when you have a sibling or a brother who's acting out, and somebody in your family who's incarcerated. It's embarrassing. And so what is toxic shame? It builds and builds and builds. This embarrassment holds and grows. And then let's talk about the second wound of childhood, verbal abuse. Now, can you imagine being told that you're stupid, or that you're ugly, or that you're a loser, or that you'll never amount to anything, or that you're a curse, and that that your parents even wish that you weren't born? I mean, this is the level to which these messages arise, unfortunately, for many. And when these messages are so profoundly hurtful, people carry that shame. Sexual abuse is just an obvious area of where the shame shows up. And anybody who has been violated with sexual abuse understands how painful this is and how shameful this is and how taboo this is and how many people hide their experience from their mothers, from their fathers, from their families because they're embarrassed and they're embarrassed and they don't feel safe to tell them. Now, an area that's not as obvious is the area of control. And when a parent controls their child, and when a parent tells and micromanages their child in terms of what to wear, what who to marry, what school to go to, even what hobbies to partake in, and what philosophies they should engage in, and so on and so forth. It's not as obvious because the shame, they're not necessarily shaming them, their child, directly, but the shame lies in the fact that the child is not seen and honored for he or she and who he or she is. And so that child has to hide him or herself and, so to speak, um, kowtow and, and form to the wishes and needs of the parent, which brings me to the narcissism of that system gone wrong, because when a parent puts their own needs before their needs of their child, when they have an agenda that supersedes the agenda of a child's authentic desires, whether they be creative desires, intellectual desires, and so forth, then they're really harnessing their child to serve them. And when you're a slave, it is embarrassing. It is embarrassing to fulfill on your parents' wishes. And again, this is a call-in show. I would love to hear from you. I know that the last couple of episodes have been a little tough with the call-ins, but I hope the problem is fixed. So go ahead, give it a call, and hopefully we will connect. And so that you can see as this builds and builds and builds, it's got places to go, and the places it has to go are not necessarily healthy. Before we talk about this projection, I also want to go to that fifth level of of childhood wounds, which is the neglect, emotional, physical neglect, and the shame that it brings. Because when you don't feel that you exist in your parents' eyes, when everything else is more important than you, then it brings into question how important you are. And then your self-image about your emergent self is going to be compromised. And this again plays into the narcissistic configuration, because the narcissism is when you are really, really not connected with. If you have parents that lack empathy, who really don't care, who display apathy, this is the most painful experience a child can bear in a lifetime, because it's really um, it's really wiping out any effect that you can have on another person. When another person sees through you, when another person does not mirror you and attune to you and get you and really sit with you and bother to understand you, there's a sense of invisibility. There's a sense of, I do not exist. And I can't think of anything more painful than that. And one of the things that I write in my book, Be the Cause Healing Human Disconnect, is in the prison system, the biggest fear is isolation. When people go into the confines of an isolation room, a tiny little room where there's very little light and no other human beings, that solitary confinement is the biggest disconnect of all. And it really shatters a person, sometimes to the point where a person can go crazy when there's nobody to look into the eyes of, when there's nobody there for them. And this is where dissociation happens, and early trauma creates also, as I've mentioned on several of my shows, when we are traumatized and we don't want to be there because it is too painful, then one of our defense mechanisms is to split off. So I want to go back into the article. What are the characteristics of toxic shame? Okay, so we know that it can hide in our unconscious, and we may not be aware that we're carrying it. When we experience it, it lasts much longer. The feelings and pain associated with shame are of greater intensity. So it's not just a flash of pain. It's sort of like it's toxic. So it's more. It's got a longer longevity in the system. An external event isn't required to trigger. This is a very important point. So it doesn't have to be somebody activating someone's negative core belief. It can simply be you activating yourself and going down into this spiral of your own thoughts and feelings of shame. Um, it leads to these spirals that cause depression, hopelessness, and despair. And then comes the shame anxiety, the fear of experiencing shame. So it's almost like the fear of fear. So once it starts taking you down, and then you get even more critical of yourself because you're thinking, wow, I'm such a loser. I can't even get myself out of this experience. I can't get myself out of the hole of depression. I cannot even control and soothe my anxiety. And again, we have to root cause it back to the source. So why is this happening? Because the parents broke that human connection with the child in the form of verbal abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, smothering, and then apathy. The biggest, most painful, non existent description of human disconnect. Apathy is true human disconnect. Why? Because if you truly don't care, if you don't have sensation, emotional sensation, if you don't have a feeling heart, think about it. You could pretty much do whatever you do and you don't care because you don't feel the pain. You're projecting the pain. So you can see that this leads to all kinds of core beliefs, and I believe she made a list of them, and I'll read them off. They're not different, too much different than the ones that I talk about. Fundamental belief underlying shame is that the person is not lovable and not worthy of connection. And again, that's why the apathy is so painful, because it really sends a message that you're not lovable and you are not worthy of attention and connection. Usually, internalized shame manifests as one of the following core beliefs. And I'm going to read off a bunch of them. And if you can identify with some of these, then maybe speak up and let's get into it, and call in so that we can break it down. So some of these
So,
core beliefs include,
Judy, we
uh,
don't have any call-ins, but we do have people talking in the chat room.
oh, okay,
um,
was there
a,
a question?
a user named Cool Bean said, "Horrible self-image. Never thought I would realize how toxic my parents have been to me in my search of what happened between me and my ex-girlfriend. Last years have been so dramatic." And then
Okay.
they proceed to say, "Does antidepressive pills work? I don't know why, but I'm afraid of taking them."
All right, so let's get into why antidepressants at best will, I'm not going to say they don't work for everybody, because a lot of people are on antidepressants. And I'm not a psychiatrist. However, I do know that if you don't do the deeper work, these medications are not going to solve the hole in the soul that this kind of a shame and wounding leaves us with. And what is the hole in the soul? It's that painful feeling of emptiness and lack of, which then gets filled with relationships and medication, legal or illegal, and porn and cell phone usage and shopping and gambling, and I can go on and on. The way we've learned how to fill them is very creative and endless. And why? Because it's embarrassing to look at yourself in the mirror and feel stupid, unattractive, to feel like a failure, to feel like a bad person, to feel like a fraud, to feel that you're a selfish a-hole, to feel like you're not enough, to hate yourself. That's what it is. It's a self hatred that's been taught to you from the outside in, to feel that you don't matter, to feel that you're defective or inadequate, that you shouldn't have even been born. Okay? Boils down to you're a nothing, you're a zero, you're worthless. And these are the things that you discover on your journey through the mind map system. And I really urge you to, at the very least, grab a copy of my PDF, Be the Cause, Healing Human Disconnect. And please, if you want to take the next step, the Mind Map video series breaks it all down. However, nothing can substitute for taking the journey with a therapist. And we have some really, really beautiful people on staff, people who are taught by me, taught the mind map system of healing. And very fortunately, I have people at all fee scales. So don't be discouraged if you do call in for your free consultation, and you're all welcome to do that.
I do have a
And
couple more in the chat room if you want to.
what's that?
I said I have a couple more people in the chat room talking.
Okay. Were there, you want to ask a question? If you don't want to call in, that's fine. You can could chat it up and ask a question. And I just wanted to say that you're welcome to call for a 15-minute consultation so that we can break down what happened to you, who done it, how did you react, what messy, shameful, toxic messages are you carrying, and what are you doing with those messages? Are you shame shifting them on other people? And that would be one of the defense mechanisms against the shame, because who wants to tolerate it? So rather than feel that you're shameful, it's a lot psychologically easier, but really not, because it doesn't work, to make other people embarrassed, to put them on the spot, to shame them and blame them and hold them responsible and put them in the spotlight of embarrassment, because you're trying to get all of that poison out onto other people. Are there any questions in the chat?
Yeah, so I got a question from Julie Haber. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah, great. Hi, Julie. How you doing? And please call in if you want. Sure.
She said, "Hi, Dr. Judy. My mom was a narcissist and my dad neglected me. Childhood emotional neglect. I feel like a complete mess. How do I help my daughter whose dad is also a narcissist?"
Okay, so Julie, this is multi-generational. And how do you help your daughter? I think you help your daughter by first doing as much work as you can to clean up your own mess. And then if the father of your daughter won't clean up his mess, I'm still a big fan of teaching children and teenagers the mind map. And one of my passions is to get it into the school system. So teach your daughter that whatever she's carrying is not her fault, and teach her that parents are not perfect, and that the messages that they uh, download and imprint into their psyche are not necessarily great ones, and messages that are going to help them grow and further them. So I think, Julie, in case of your daughter, do do teach her. The mind map is visual. It's real simple. You could just sit down with her and say, "Look, sweetie, here's what goes down with every human being. We're all wounded, you know, including you and me and everyone." And Julie, you had a narcissistic mother and a father that was not present. I think that's what you said. Yes, in the message. Is that
Yes.
correct? So in both cases, you were not seen and heard, which is really painful because we self-define in the eyes of our parents, and that's how we learn to be proud of ourselves, and that's how we learn to have a core sense of self, and that's how we learn to become independent by having a guide, and that guide should be the family guide. And if they're missing because of apathy or simply not being physically present, then we don't have that guide and we have no one to literally mirror us. So I would tell your daughter how important it is for her to understand these negative messages that soaked in, because as you know, so many children get depressed and start drinking and doing other forms of drugs or cutting themselves, or horror stories of suicide because they think that they're worthless and shameful and inadequate and stupid and ugly and on and on and on. So these negative core beliefs and this toxic shame that we hold is so dangerous. It is a time bomb just waiting to be pushed. And then what happens when it is, and the child doesn't have a core sense of self? Boom, boom, boom. Panel 4, 5, 6. No mystery. If you're foundationally not being mirrored and attuned to and supported, then your inner core doesn't get a strong foundation. You don't have that built built in soothing, that built in self confidence, that built in uh, stable object constancy, which means that you know that things will be up and down and sideways and so on, but that they'll come back around again. If you're missing all of that, it's a really, really scary world. And it's a world that can easily be triggered into chaos. And then those defenses don't hold, because when people defend with drug, sex, rock and roll, and all these other things that I mentioned, doesn't work, doesn't work, doesn't work. They try to numb the pain and so on. But at the end of the journey, that defense mechanism becomes like a psychological prison, and makes people sick. And then the big breakdown happens because they don't hold up. You know, it's kind of like a dam that breaks. When that dam breaks, all hell breaks loose, and people in an extreme form can potentially implode, which is the self harm, all the way, of course, to suicide, or explode, which is lashing out and then getting so toxically poisoned that they spew out their anger on other people. And on the extreme end is the homicide, which we see all around us. We see suicide and homicide all around us. And I don't know what the statistics are, but they're way up there, which tells us that we're not doing too well as a human race. And so that's why it's important to teach your children the mind map and teach them the psychological process so that they don't get stuck thinking that they are losers and ugly and stupid, and be on top of them. Because if you see that your children are symptomatic, you don't know, maybe they've been bullied or sexually abused at school, or maybe some teacher shamed them. You don't know, but that's why it's so important to have a relationship with your children, so that you can talk to them, check in with them, see how they're doing. And sometimes you even want to check their body, make sure they're not bruised or scratched. Be that parent that is the parent who really, really not only offers them safety emotionally and physically, but a parent that will stay on top of their game and check your children, make sure that their grades are not slipping, make sure that they're not acting out, cutting themselves, or their breath isn't smelling of alcohol, they don't have track marks all over their arms. It's our responsibility as parents to make sure as best as we can that our children are okay. And if we have partners that are failing to be a better parent along with us, then sometimes we have to sever those toxic ties, unfortunately. And then we have to teach our children to have boundaries, even if they choose to have contact with that toxic parent, to understand that the toxic parent is an unhealed parent and may try to project their toxic shame and shame shift onto the child, so that when the child speaks up and says something about their behavior, they will be put down and back in their place, and the shame shift starts, and they will redirect the toxic parent will redirect that shame back on the child. Shame on you for confronting me, or shame on you for judging me, or shame on you for really anything. And then shame shifting goes back into the child's system, and then reverberates in their head, and this toxicity keeps growing and growing, and then the questioning in the child's head, and the what the Freud, which is the broken record. Yeah, my dad's right. I must be a loser. He's great. Look at him. He makes a lot of money, lives in a big house, or whatever, whatever, whatever. Won all these awards. And, what's wrong with me? He's right. There's something wrong with me. And so, really, it's that parent that's ashamed at the core and hasn't confronted his or her childhood wounds, and is hiding behind the mask of money, success, awards, and so on, and has erected a really, really bad game of projecting the shame onto their children, or their lovers, or spouses, or coworkers, and so on. And I have several episodes where I talk about control versus vulnerability. And this is what happens to people who have been so injured that they basically cut their heart out. They basically numbed out, and they don't want to face up to their pain. So what do? Instead of vulnerability, they've lost trust in the world. They can't be vulnerable to the world, so they just shut down or project, and hide behind the mask of this false self, and whatever the false self is presenting to the world. And that's another thing that brings shame to children, is that when they say to somebody, my dad is so mean to me, and then publicly that dad or that mom is so nice and generous, and the team spirit, or the school volunteer, and on and on and on. There's so much cognitive dissonance because it doesn't line up.
Hey, Dr. Judy, we do have somebody on the line.
Okay,
Her name is
okay,
her name is
yeah,
Andrea Moore. I'm gonna let her through right now.
okay, okay. Hi, Andrea. Andrea, hello.
Hello, can you
Hi.
hear me?
Yes, I hope the call stays intact. Let's pray that it does, okay?
Yes, yes.
Okay, nice to hear from you. So what the Freud is going on in your life that you relate to the topic of shame shifting?
Well, today's the 13-month anniversary of my, well, it's 13 months ago was my husband passed away with COVID.
Hmm.
And what comes up for me is all of these. He was if we could use the name Min, M-I-N, Minnie, like Min.
M-I-N. I don't know what that means.
No, my name is Min, M-I-N.
Yeah, okay.
Minnie?
Yeah.
Thank you. So he passed away, and I'm feeling so much shame around. He was First Nations full blood, Ojibwe, and they've just discovered a mass amount of graves here in Canada. And strangely enough, a lot of Canada is just being very racist about it and saying, well, we shouldn't have let our children be taken by the church and by the government and put in these
You know, this is a topic very, very dear to my heart, and I wasn't really going to mention it, but you mentioned it, so I'm working on a project of healing this horrific uh, wounding of this genocide that's been plaguing the Ojibwe people, Ojibwa people, and First Nations people. So that's actually in action. So if you want to contact me about that, please do. Okay. And so this toxic shame, you're talking about it reverberating on a mass level, correct? On a mass level.
Yes, and there's some interruptions in. There's a voice coming through saying that I'm in the waiting room.
No, I can hear you. I can hear you fine.
It dropped out for a second, but I got her back quickly.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah. So, but it's the strangest thing is I'm feeling all the shame. Like I'm feeling the shame.
Okay, and the shame of what? So if you were to verbalize it, shame on you for
being Native, being Jewish, being mixed blood, for not being a human being, because there's so much racism that I'm getting hit on both sides of these cultures. I don't know. I feel stupid. I feel like, why can't I handle this? And one of my girl chums said to me, you know, oh, this is all so dark. Like, do we need to even talk about this? Let's just lighten up. And I thought, lighten up. It's my husband. My husband died during COVID, and they found almost 1,000 little innocent children stolen from their families.
These
and
graves and Andrea, this is so big and it's so multi-generational, and it's feeling really cultural genocide, and that's something that I'm currently actively working on, and I want to talk to you about this, okay, because it really is happening. And so you know, this mind map was originally a system for healing global disconnect. And if you take a look around and take a look at what you've just said, the isms abound. All the isms, which are, you know, in and of themselves, there's nothing wrong with being black or white or Jewish or American and Chinese. It's just that what's happened is a lot of these isms have become race isms, and they've become cultural narcissism to the point where one ism thinks that they're better than another or worse than another. So this is toxic, multi-generational cultural narcissism. It's big, okay? So it's not just little old you sitting there feeling it. Millions of people have been feeling it. And look at the combination of people that you are. You said that you're Native American, yes?
Yes.
Okay, so that's not exactly a popular race. I think the planet is pretty much shown that they've been trying to, quote, get rid of the Indian problem and tear trail them across the Mississippi and push them into territories where there was nothing for them, and sign legal, I don't know what's, to disenfranchise them from their culture and their people and put them in boarding schools and convert them to Catholicism and take them as far away as possible from their language. So do you see that this is, I call it a de-gutting of the people. That's what I call it. Okay.
You know, the one thing I got to say, I love so much how much you've helped me with your book, your mind map series. But I'm really in bad shape tonight. Like, I feel all of my Native community here in Canada, we're shut down. Like, we're dissociating.
So, you know, I'm just going to say it straight up. I'm starting a group next Wednesday for Native Americans, First Nations people. I'm going to direct you to the website. It's really not well put together because we just started putting it together. But I'm going to put it out there because this seminar, this mind mapping Zoom seminar, which will be 10 weeks long, is happening next Wednesday from 4 to 5:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And please contact me about it. I think it's really, really important. And please put the word out to your fellow Native people. And that website is BeTheCauseIndigenousHealing.com. BeTheCauseIndigenousHealing.com. It's interesting that you're talking about it because I wasn't planning on speaking about it because I really wanted to get it started, and it's my first honor to utilize my mind map on a more global scale. So I'm very, very inspired. I'm very, very passionate.
I'm so relieved. I'm so relieved. I feel so much more at ease. Also that you don't tell me that it didn't happen and that it was my parents' fault for putting me in those schools, or that, 13,
No, I know. First of all, I've been very fortunate to have some deep and heart-to-heart conversations with Native American people that are educating me. On the website, I posted 2 of the episodes I did with, quote, Violet, an Ojibwa woman, and then I'm going to post some more information, and I'm learning so much. And one of the things that I learned recently is that Canada, which is where I spent 12 and a half years of my life, the name Canada was really borrowed from a term that, if I hope I'm getting this right, please forgive me if I'm not quoting it correctly. Apparently, when Columbus landed, he asked, "Where am I?" And the natives said, Akanada, Akanada, which means sacred land. Okay? So not only did the colonial people kick them off of their land and push them back and corral them into reservations and mistreat them and convert them and demean, devalued, and destroyed them, they stole the name, okay? Akanada, shortened it to Canada. So I don't know if it was Columbus or whoever had that exchange. That's where the name originated. At least that's what I've been told. I'm going to do some more research about it, but I cannot believe that I spent 12 and a half years of my life in Akanada, never knew about the history of the word Canada, not one honorable mention in a textbook, not one. So there's just so much that we don't know. There's so many lies and misperceptions. And speaking of cracked lens of perception, and why culturally Native Americans have a huge hole in the soul, and why they're filling it with alcohol, and why there's such a high rate of alcoholism and suicidality, and why people walk around with this lack of sense of peace, and lack of sense of identification with the culture and strong family unit. Um, this has many generations of history behind it. And so when I do the mind map in this round of healing the whole and the soul of the indigenous people, we're going to bring in the culture. And the human disconnect is not just mother infant disconnect, father infant disconnect, but the forcing of the mother infant disconnect. Okay. Speaking of shame shifting, Jesus, this is a massive projection onto an entire race of people that we're still feeling, you're still feeling the reverberations of. So we're going to go pretty heavy on this, and we're going to tell some pretty heavy truths on this, and I'm going to be learning so much, and mainly applying the mind map, so that the shame that is buried in the heart of the Native American, because they've had nothing positive. They've had no positive mirroring from the world. None. Are you still there? Well, even if you're not there, I hope you heard me, okay? And please do call me. Did that call drop? Do you know?
She should still be in here.
I'm back.
Oh, good. Did you hear what I said?
I didn't. I'm sorry. It dropped a few times.
Okay, so I want you to hear the show again, but the essence of it is this is so thick and heavy and deep, and this is an example of cultural genocide. Okay, I call it a degutting of your people. And we're going to get very into it in this seminar. Will you please be in touch with me about it, and then start putting the word out to the people who have been at the effect of this? Can you hear me?
She's not here anymore, but the call-in studio is still working. So if anyone else wants to call in.
So in any case, I think, audience, I hope you've heard me, and then be in touch with me, please, okay? And anyone who is suffering from the effects of this um, cultural horror story, trauma upon the people. And that's what happens is when on a grand scale we start becoming massive isms. Okay, so on a mini scale, we've got projection onto our spouses, our children, our coworkers, bosses, so on and so forth. But on a grand scale, this is how ugly it looks. This is how massively destructive it is. This is how you take down a people and leave them shattered. Okay, so that's what I'm going to be up to next week. If anybody wants more information, please contact me. And the name of that website, which is still very new, is Be the Cause Indigenous Healing.com. I'm really sorry about this call center. Hopefully we'll be able to resolve it, or we'll just have to be with type-in questions, which I'm fine with too. Okay, so again, I want to thank you all for joining me. And now you can see the micro version of toxicity and shame shifting and destroying other people, and the macro version where you can destroy the spirit, the culture, the language, the rituals, the heart of an entire nation of people. And this seems to be happening over and over in various forms for many generations on the planet. And I'm really feeling honored to have the privilege to use the mind map to start in and heal this on with this particular the Native American people. So thank you so much for calling in. I'm sorry about the call-in center. Hopefully, my audience heard me and can relate to toxic shame and shame shifting on a macro scale. And please join me and call in and take advantage of the free consultation. And thank you again for tuning in. Good night, everybody. And if you've enjoyed my show, please subscribe to my channel. If you need help, please call the number below. And if you